I'm Judy Stephenson. I'm a professor of economic history at UCL. Welcome to A Cup of Tea, where we are interested in how academic research can make the world better. Ella Cockbain, Professor of Human Trafficking and Exploitation. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining me for A Cup of Tea. Tea being a global commodity, but an English tradition, can you tell me what you've chosen and why?
I went for lemon and ginger because anything that's not herbal, people always put milk in it. And milk in tea is just...
Another person who doesn't like milk. Okay.
No, I like milk. I like milk and coffee, where it belongs.
But not in tea.
Not in tea.
Builders with lots of milk. Okay. Well, thank you. Cheers. Thank you for joining us.
Cheers.
So our first question for you is, if you had £1 million research budget now, what would you research and why with that £1 million?
One, PhD funding, because PhD supervision is one of the best parts of this job. And PhDs come in with amazing ideas or ways of approaching things. And it's really sad that it's getting harder and harder to get funding for great PhD students. So that would be thing number one. Thing number two, mixed methods research. I am absolutely loving that at the moment. I'm working with some really cool colleagues on a project that has like a survey at its heart, gathering quant data, and then we've got interviews and focus groups around the qual side.
So tell us a bit more. So, because in human trafficking and exploitation, how does mixed methods work?
So this particular project is looking at labour market exploitation in the UK, particularly as it affects precarious workers. So it's not the kind of sharp end of extreme criminalised exploitation under the kind of trafficking umbrella. It's more your sort of everyday routinized wage theft, not getting the breaks you're entitled to, things like that.
So you've got live respondents, you're working with people who are experiencing these things, and you're researching with them?
So I am co-leading this project with my colleague, Chris Posh. And so the project has a representative survey of people in precarious work and of the UK workforce more broadly. And we're asking them in that survey about their experiences at work in the last 2 years and the various things they've experienced, concerns they might have. And then kind of embedded within that, we did follow-up in-depth interviews with people in precarious work to try and understand more about the kind of messiness and complexity of their lived experiences. And then we also did focus groups with workers around attitudes and experiences of trade unions. So it's kind of bringing the projects about the scale and nature of labour market non-compliance. So quant is great for scale, but it's not so good for kind of messy human realities.
And the £1 million would help that by?
I mean, research is expensive.
Yeah. So you said PhDs, mixed methods. Anything else that you'd be looking at?
Impacted communities, listening to and learning from. Because a lot of research on trafficking and related areas tends to be really top down, and there's so much importance that gets lost from what's actually happening on the ground, and there's a lot of spin and a lot of agendas.
Tell us a bit more about what the impact of communities are.
I mean, it's twofold. So like human trafficking gets talked about as if it's like this thing, right? That's like really easy to discern, and you get all these campaigns like spot the signs of human trafficking. In reality, human trafficking isn't one thing. It's a ton of different things smushed together under this big umbrella concept. And there's a real lack of coherence in there. So you've got child sexual exploitation, you've got criminal exploitation, you've got exploitation in global supply chains, you've got organ trafficking. So it's so many different things put in there. And then anti-trafficking is also talked about as if it's this one thing. And there's some really bad dominant models of anti-trafficking that cause a lot of damage on the ground.
Tell me more.
So right from the start, historically, the whole anti-trafficking agenda has been very tied up with kind of moral panics around migration.
I see.
And so migration control as if that were a solution, which is not. And also a tendency to conflate sex work. So when adults consentingly sell sexual services with sexual exploitation, and kind of try and treat all of that as trafficking, which is wildly unhelpful and really quite disrespectful to people's lived experiences in the sex trades. And because of that, a lot of anti-trafficking interventions, they cause a lot of collateral damage to sex workers.
And so would you have more PhD students look at this on the ground impact, or what would you?
I'm really bad at choosing one thing.
That's okay.
In this scenario, I guess the dream would be to be able to fund several PhDs, ideally the PhDs themselves to come from impacted communities.
Okay.
And be using super cool mixed methods.
Okay, cool.
Approaches.
Yeah.
Not to be too specific about my wish list.
So tell me a little bit more about how you got into the field first.
Complete kind of coincidence and serendipity. So I did a language degree as my undergrad, and then I went and worked in advertising, and then I was losing my mind. I was working for a big multinational corporate giant on a washing powder account.
We have this in common, by the way. We've discussed this, yeah, exactly.
So my first ever published book was an analysis of laundry powder demos, talking about, what color maybe would be the best choice. But it was soul destroying, I hated it. But while I was there, I was also working on quite a well-known charity account around trying to address, at the time, there was a lot of vilification of children. And it was around the time there was all sort of a feral youth, all this nonsense like that. And I was much more interested in that side of things. And so I sort of, I was looking for a way to get out, and there were some masters at UCL that had scholarships on countering organised crime and terrorism, and I thought that looked quite cool, so I applied. And they said, yeah, we've also got a new PhD programme with funding. Would you be interested in that?
And here you are.
Here I am.
Now I see
16 years on.
Now I see why you think PhDs are important. You know what I mean? Yeah, because you wouldn't have, without that funding, we wouldn't have.
Right, completely, yeah. I mean, I would have had no idea how to come in with a really kind of well-developed, fully formed proposal. But I think I've had some brilliant PhD students myself since who've come in via quite unconventional routes that have often done really great things.
So tell us about some misconceptions in the field that you would really like to clear up.
I think one of the biggest ones is the idea that you can police and prosecute your way out of this. There absolutely is a place for criminal justice responses, in my view. Not everyone agrees, but I think there is. And for those victims and survivors that want that. But that alone is never going to make a kind of big substantive difference in terms of levels of exploitation.
So when you say that you can't just police and prosecute your way out of it, what could change or reset things?
Prevention, actual kind of sustained, meaningful investment in prevention, in thinking about what are the kind of systemic and structural factors that could be changed, modified, to sort of both reduce the likelihood of exploitation, but also reduce its impact and make it easier for people to seek redress and justice in whatever form justice means to them.
So we actually have to set it up properly. It won't just sort itself out.
Yeah, and also opportunity. So a lot of kind of anti-trafficking responses kind of fall into two main camps. This is a bit of a crude simplification, but essentially on the kind of one hand, very focused on sort of individual offenders and the idea that this is all these kind of super evil guys over there. And don't get me wrong, there are some, people do horrendous things under the banner of trafficking, that is true. But chasing after the sort of idealized evil offender is only going to get you so far. On the other hand, sort of there's a camp that focuses a lot on the sort of big structural policy drivers, which are also really important, but again, only going to get you so far and doesn't necessarily acknowledge that there are also some pretty horrible people out there. And then the bit that gets kind of forgotten often is that sort of middle layer around opportunity and the kind of social, physical environments we're in and the opportunities that present to exploit people, and thinking about how those might be modified.
So what I'm hearing is that this stuff, when you're saying it's baked in, are big employers part of the problem, or is this something that happens in what we could call the informal economy?
I think it's all over. I did a ESRC funded postdoc fellowship several years ago now, where I was looking at labour trafficking in the UK and kind of identified victimisations, and that was a real eye-opener when you're sort of going through the case files. And yes, there's your sort of very, very informal labour markets, but there's also, it's cropping up in the supply chains for very big name brands.
Oh, God, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, so what are you working on now, and what are the particular challenges or barriers that you're coming up against?
So I've got 3 really cool things at the moment. One is we've just had a book published with UCL Press on evaluation for anti-trafficking interventions. And what's really exciting about that is it brings together really cool people from across public health, politics, crime, social work, and beyond, to kind of think more around how to encourage a more evidence-based approach and ways to kind of explain the challenges in practice and case studies from that. So I'm hoping that will get kind of widely read. We're really glad that it's open access, can be downloaded for free.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thing number 2 is the project I mentioned earlier with my co-PI Chris Posh, looking at the scale and nature of labour market non-compliance and other work-based harms, which is a bit of a mouthful, essentially labour market exploitation and precarious work in the UK. And that's for the Director of Labour Market Enforcement. We are in the final stages of that, looking to report next year.
So I'm hearing that when you're going into the field and dealing with people who are, working every day or living the experience of labour market exploitation, what are the challenges of getting into the field and actually doing the research on the ground?
We're figuring out who you want to talk to and how, and understanding where the biases lie. So I guess with that particular project, the interviews were with people who were already in our survey respondent pool, so they'd indicated that they'd be interested in a follow-up. But we're acutely aware that, we're not able to, through that design, kind of access the people who are in the most extreme and isolated situations of exploitation. So we don't pretend to do that. On more generally, when you're looking at trafficking and exploitation, often there's really big ethical risks, and you need to think very, very carefully about the impact of the research and I guess how to design it in a way that it's useful for the people who are affected by these issues, so that it's not kind of flying in, being super extractive, putting people's lives at risk.
Yeah, how you care for the people that you're studying. Okay.
I got a really cool prize from the Leverhulme Trust, who are awesome. So that's a Philip Leverhulme prize. And I am doing some stuff around solidarities and grassroots resistance and community organising across kind of multiple areas.
So this is where there's grassroots resistance in a community to an organisation or a set of exploiters, or?
No, so a little bit different. One of the things I talked about was kind of wanting to disaggregate trafficking, right? So rather than smudge everything together. And then once you've disaggregated, like the different trafficking issues overlap with so many different things. So that, they overlap with drugs policy, they overlap with migration, with domestic work, with sex workers' rights, with LGBTQ plus people's rights, with sexual and reproductive health, racial justice, reparations. So there's like a whole bunch of things. And one of the things that colleagues and I have been arguing recently is it feels, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say the world is getting worse, right? There is definitely a strong authoritarian turn in politics in many places internationally. There's the ascendancy of the far right. Kind of in the face of all that, one of the things we're keen to think about is we know that the kind of current top-down trafficking, your sort of raid and rescue models, can often cause more harm than good. So thinking from a kind of bottom up, what's already going on, because there's loads, like solidarity is nothing new. There's loads of communities across the world who are already doing incredible kind of grassroots organising against different forms of oppression, violence, exploitation, injustice. So kind of under that sort of Leverhulme prize money, I'm keen to explore that area further, learn more from people doing that on kind of grassroots level, and kind of, it's a really cool prize because you get to sort of go in a bit of a different direction.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Is there a researcher, either in your field or elsewhere, who you find inspiring?
I can't choose one favourite because...
No, you said you couldn't choose one.
I told you I'm not very good at that.
So what are your favourites? Who are your favourites?
My favourites are people who communicate in a way that is clear and engaging and accessible and precise and not wrapped in like jargon and unnecessarily long words. And I like reading any academic work that is like a joy to read in its clarity, even if the subject matter is awful. It's something that, the kind of flip of it is, when you read academic papers sometimes and you feel like you're sort of walking in a maze and you're like, I'm sure you've got a point, but I can't for the life of me figure out what your point is. So don't like those, do like clear communication.
What's the last really good thing you read like that then?
I read a brilliant book by Nicola Kelly, who's one of the best journalists working on migration at the moment. So it's not academic, it's brilliant, called Anywhere But Here, which is about everything that's wrong with the UK's asylum system. But again, that's a book that deals with a very heavy topic, but in a really thoughtful, reflexive, well-written way that gets the points across clearly.
All academics, beware.
So yeah, and Open Democracy has been great for that. I've really enjoyed being able to work with shorter form writing, being able to commission people that have kind of interesting, cool things to say, and things turning around much quicker. Because that's another thing that can be really frustrating in academia. It can take years, and especially if you're working on kind of social policy issues that are urgent and feel urgent, it can be frustrating that to become sort of formalized in the academic
by the
evidence.
time you're through the academics journal system, the peer review system, it's 3 years down the line. You're like, this is no longer.
If you're lucky, and then front end, you've got to think about getting funding and stuff.
Yeah.
So it can take a really long time. Whereas with Open Democracy, we've been able to be like, okay, this is an issue. We know it's an issue. Will you do an interview with us? Will you write something for us? And you can have the thing out in a matter of weeks.
Tell us a bit about Open Democracy and your role in it.
So Open Democracy is a big media platform. On it, they have various projects. One of them is called Beyond Trafficking and Slavery. It's been running for about 11 years now. It was set up as a kind of public education, bridging sort of academia and journalism to challenge misinformation, or not so much misinformation as kind of dodgy assumptions and myths around trafficking. And it's evolved over the years, and it's become a kind of platform for critical writing around challenges in these fields, also in relation to smuggling.
So it's got the academic impact, but speed of the essence, if you like.
So we have academics write for us, but we also have professional journalists write for us. We have people from kind of affected communities, people from NGOs, people in all sorts of different organizations all over the world. So it's a real mix.
So tell me, there's three significant things. You see three big problems in the world that your research speaks to and can make better. What are those top three? I haven't asked you for one, I've asked you for three.
The ways that people get exploited in everyday life, improving responses to that, trying to prevent that, trying to, I guess, try and help make the world a bit less rubbish. But I don't think research alone is going to do that. I think we have an important role to play in terms of building stronger evidence bases, trying to figure out, what's effective for whom, under what circumstances. But at the end of the day, a lot of this is politics, and there has to be that political will. And not just politicians, it's also other power structures. So, businesses love a bit of, anti-trafficking, when the anti-trafficking is about let's raise some awareness, let's spot some signs. Businesses are not so keen at thinking about everyday labor exploitation of workers in their supply chains, for example. Not all businesses, not all men.
Yeah. Hot topic, AI, artificial intelligence. How is it going to impact your work? Is it going to replace your PhD students, or is it going to transform your work?
I'd be lying if I pretended to know. There's a lot of exploitation connected to AI, so there's definitely research areas there. You know, you think about things like deep fakes. There's a massive kind of problem area around deep fake child sexual abuse, say. And also, I guess, if you think on the environmental side, what's that going to mean for, the data centers? They're already causing devastation in all sorts of communities around the world. And I guess there's questions around what are the impacts in terms of local populations and things, and how that kind of shapes the contours of opportunities, constraints, exploitation there. I would say I'm net more worried than excited, but that's the field I work in. If I worked in a different field, I might feel quite differently.
So tell us a bit about, in such a hopeful field, human trafficking and exploitation, tell us a bit about your hopes and fears for what academic research is going to contribute to the world more generally.
I think it would be really lovely for universities to look at the labour exploitation within universities. I mean, they really don't like doing that. What are my hopes? I have no hopes. I'm all fears. Okay,
it's a dark time to be a researcher, particularly in your field. But so the greatest fear is
the chronic underfunding of universities. I'm worried about mass closures across arts and humanities, because we really need critical thinking, we really need creative thinking. Lots of people on the more high science side of things do not always think particularly carefully about the human side to interventions. And I don't like the way subjects are being split into like, oh, that's useful, that's not.
So it's really important to have that interdisciplinarity in the whole.
Yeah, and thinking about ethics. I think there is a lot around how we think about the ethics of what research funding we accept, the ethics of research partnerships, and the kind of ethical moments in practice as we're doing our research, because you can't envisage everything in advance.
Yeah. Okay, so what is the scariest thing you've ever had to do as a researcher?
Dealing with death threats and threats of sexual violence.
To you?
Yeah, and to my kids. Because, they care about women and girls.
Can you tell us a tiny bit more?
Yes, so one of the areas I've worked a lot on is child sexual exploitation. And there has been, since 2011, a very narrow focus in the UK on this idea of child sexual exploitation as a particularly, or sometimes some people even phrase it as sort of almost uniquely, problem of so-called Muslim grooming gangs. My PhD was on complex child sexual exploitation, child trafficking. It involved cases in towns and cities that have now become kind of synonymous with grooming gangs, places like Telford and Rotherham and Rochdale. There's been a huge amount of misinformation and disinformation in this space, and it's really dangerous because it lets racism get in the way of child protection. It makes it very, very easy to ignore all sorts of other child sexual abuse.
How did that lead to?
It may not surprise you that the far right makes a lot of political hay out of this. And then more recently, Elon Musk has been weighing in on this issue, and I sort of got dragged into it because my research was being misrepresented again
online
this year. So once Musk sort of started tweeting about the so-called Cockbain report, there is no Cockbain report. The UCL ended up having to put out a misinformation statement because it got so ridiculous. Then, kind of death threats and just barrage of abuse. But I mean, it's been happening for years because I've done quite a lot of sort of writing in the media around challenging some of these kind of faulty assumptions and trying to encourage a response to child sexual abuse that focuses on protecting all children, which isn't at all about, covering up or pretending that certain cases don't exist. They do, they're horrific. I know they're horrific. It's horrible.
It just needs to be depoliticized. I'm so sorry you experienced that. You said UCL had to put out a statement. So were they able to do that?
Yeah, so they put out a statement this summer, I think.
And that helped you?
I think it's useful as a corrective for the misinformation. So, you know, if people see, oh, the Cockbain report says X, Y, Z, because the thing is, like, a lot of very high profile people, of which the richest man in the world was one, sharing things saying the Cockbain report finds X, Y, Z. So I think that, you know, if you now Google it, you get this thing explaining that there is actually no Cockbain report, which I think is quite useful.
Well, we'll do our best to make sure there is no misrepresentation of any kind of report or of anything you've said. Thank you so much for sharing a cup of tea with me.
No worries.
It is, you might be working on depressing stuff, but it's inspiring to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.